So let's wrap up here with some more issues about visual perception. And one aspect of visual perception we need to understand is depth perception. Like, how are we able to distinguish between something that's close to us versus something that's farther away? All right, there's lots of different ways that our brains interpret depth. The first thing to understand is that depth perception is an ability that people have by the time we're very, very young. Really, by the time we crawl, we have the ability of depth perception to tell if something is close or farther away from us. And one of the ways we know that is from a very famous experiment done by Gibson and Walk, where they use this thing called a visual cliff. And there's all kinds of variations of this study. It's fascinating stuff. Basically, what they did, you can see in the illustration here, they take a young child, an infant, and put him over here on the ledge of this tabletop, this long countertop. And mom is standing over here. Mom has volunteered to have the baby studied safely here. All right. Mom's standing at the opposite end of this tabletop. As you can see, the entire tabletop is covered in glass. So if the baby walks, or crawls rather, baby's not old enough to walk yet, if the baby crawls the whole way over to mama, it's not going to fall. The baby will safely crawl to mom because the tabletop is covered in glass. The researchers wanted to see if the baby would stop, though, at this visual cliff. They use this prominent checkerboard pattern to make it easy for the baby to distinguish, maybe with limited eyesight at such a young age, just to be, safe about it. They use that checkerboard pattern. So here's, the basis of their experiment. They put the baby over here, put mom on the other end, and the mom says, "Come to mama, baby, come to mom, come get the teddy bear." And the baby starts crawling over to mama. And a lot of times that baby would stop right here, right where this baby is. They would stop at the visual cliff. They'd look down, look up at mama, and if mama just stood there staring at the baby, that baby would not go any further, at least at first. This told Gibson and Walk that that baby was perceiving depth. That baby was able to tell that there was a drop off there, that they should stop. This tells us that by the time we're able to crawl, we can perceive depth. And an evolutionary psychologist would say, yeah, that makes sense. If we're crawling around, we're vulnerable. We need to have depth perception for our own safety and survival. So, of course, by the time we're crawling, we're going to have that ability. But that is not the end of the studies. That's not where Gibson and Walk left it. Just to be clear, if mom persisted, come on, baby, come to mama. If mommy, go to the baby on, the baby would oftentimes continue over the visual cliff and crawl to mama safely. Even though if it was a real cliff, the baby would have fallen to his death. Yeah, for research sake, Shame on you, the couple of you that just chuckled a little bit. Some of you laughed at the idea of this baby falling down and becoming goo on an actual cliff. Like, that's messed up. What's wrong with you people? Come on, check your ethics. Anyway, it's interesting that Gibson and Walk twisted this experiment. They changed the variables in some ways. Consider this. If mom said, "Come on, baby," she smiles, "Come to mom. Yeah, yeah, come to mama." Sometimes, oftentimes, the babies would go over the visual cliff and walk to mama, thinking that they're safe. But if they had mama do this, "Come on, baby, come to mama, come to mama." If mama made facial expressions like, "It's not safe, maybe don't do it," even if she said, "Come hither," that baby would oftentimes stay put, sometimes even turning back and going to the beginning of this tabletop, showing that even at this very young age, the baby could understand facial expressions, okay, and add that information to their depth perception. even at 6 or 8 or 9 months of age, whenever they're crawling. Some of this interpretation is possible in a young child's mind. But here's another kicker. To conclude the studies, Gibson and Walk also looked very carefully at how the babies would treat the visual cliff in other ways I haven't discussed yet. For instance, the babies that would turn around and head away from the visual cliff. Sometimes, follow my cursor here, sometimes those babies, they look at mama's like, right? And the baby's going to turn around and head back to the beginning, the tabletop. But sometimes those babies, in the process of turning around, their little chubby baby legs, they would turn around, they would crawl over the cliff. Now, again, it's a glass countertop. They're not falling anywhere. But if it were a real cliff, they would have fallen over the visual cliff. Baby goo at the bottom of the cliff. Shame on you. The couple of you that just chuckled again. What's wrong with you people? Are you getting the point here? What Gibson and Walk, besides realizing you're a terrible person, are you getting what Gibson and Walk discovered? The babies do have depth perception, but they have not perfected how to use it. Again, some of these babies who turned around, they would crawl this way and turn around over the visual cliff to head back to the beginning. If it were a real cliff, they would have fallen. They can see the visual cliff, but they might not have the mental maturity yet to know how to deal with it. So if you have little kids around, little kids crawling in your homes, keep the baby gates up at the stairs. Those babies can see the depth. They can see that the stairs fall downward, that they will, they see the bottom step is farther away from them, that it's down like that. But they might not understand what to do with that information. They don't understand how to safely deal with that height, that depth. Okay? Something else that affects our depth perception, and that's really what we're looking at next here. The things that affect our depth perception, even at those young ages, by the time we're crawling. What is the brain using to perceive depth in this way? Well, one of the things is called linear perspective, and I'm using this painting from Leonardo DiCaprio, who painted Jesus and the Last Supper here. Did you catch it? I said Leonardo DiCaprio. Did you catch it? Shame on you if you don't know that it's Da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, one of the Ninja Turtles, who painted this. The jokes are just coming, folks. Come on, bear with me. Be with me here. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper, and it's a brilliant use of linear perspective, folks, in this painting. This is on a flat, surface that this is painted on, certainly, but it's given the sense of depth because linear perspective is used here. And linear perspective is what it's called when it appears that what would be straight parallel lines seem to converge together as they approach the horizon line. So back here in the distance is the horizon. You can see the horizontal line here of the horizon. And these rafters and the seams in the walls where they meet the ceilings, those would be, and I guess there's like tapestries on the walls here. These would be straight lines in an actual room, lines that parallel each other. But because those lines seem to converge together as they appear to move in the distance, it gives us a sense that what's happening back here is farther away than what's happening up here. Also, probably not a coincidence that all these lines and the rafters, the ceiling, the tapestries, all those lines, if you follow them, would converge to our focal point, which is Jesus here in the painting. All right, linear perspective is one of these things, just one thing, that affects our depth perception. Now, we need to put linear perspective in a category, folks. If you're taking notes here, let's have an umbrella term called monocular depth cues. Monocular, M-O-N-O-C-U-L-A-R, monocular depth cues. What that means is, like linear perspective is an example, of a depth cue, something your brain picks up on visually that tells the brain about depth, but you only need one eye for this depth cue to work. All the monocular depth cues, you could be like my poor ugly wife who loses an eye, and you'll still have some depth perception. Right now, close one eye and look at this painting. You can still tell the windows here in the background are behind the dinner guests and behind Jesus. Okay? The table is in the foreground. The guests are behind it. They're farther away from you. They're not, by the way. This is on a flat surface, but it gives the illusion of depth, and part of that is because of linear perspective. A monocular depth cue. You only need one eye to see these would-be parallel lines are converging off in the distance, giving a sense of depth. Before I change slides, let's talk about one other, and we're going to get into several, but one other monocular depth cue is called interposition. Interposition. That's a fancy name, folks, for when one thing in your environment covers up another. Okay, let's try this. You're looking at your screen even. Can you tell right now which of my hands is closer to you, closer to my camera than the other? Is it this one or that one? Which one's a little bit closer to you? This or that? Hard to tell, right? What if I do this? Now, which one is closer to you? This one or that one? Now it's obviously this one. And it's obvious that my two hands are closer to the camera than my face is because they're covering up my face a bit. You're welcome for that. Okay? And even here, this hand is covering this one. That's called interposition. It's another monocular depth cue. You only need one eye to see that your vision is blocked from this hand by this one. That tells the brain that this one is closer to you because it's covering this hand and it's covering my face and the drawing in the background. That's happening in this painting as well. You can't see the dinner guests' knees, their legs, because they're covered up from the waist down by the table. Also, the windows are obviously in the background because of interposition. The faces, the heads, the bodies are partially covering the windows in the background. So in this one painting, we have interposition telling the brain, oh, these people are closer than the windows, but the table is closer than the people. And we've got linear perspective from all of these would-be parallel lines converging off into the distance, as they appear to anyway, telling our brain, oh, so this wall back here is farther away than the table is, even though it's really not. Now, be careful, because linear perspective and some of these other cues can be used to fool you. Look at, you've seen stuff like this probably, but look, which of these three colored bars, which one's taller than the others? Of course, they're all the exact same height. If you don't believe me, pause the video, get a ruler or use your fingers or something and measure. These three bars, they are the exact same height, but this one in the back looks much taller than the other two because of linear perspective. It's all relative here. Because these lines are converging together, right, in the background at the vanishing point, that tells our brains that this bar is farther away from us than this bar. You've got these lines too, like this looks like a sidewalk. If this were a real sidewalk, this line and these lines out here to the sides would be parallel. But because they look like they get closer together in the distance, that tells our brain, oh, this part of the sidewalk back here is farther away than this part of the sidewalk is. And then your brain goes, okay, and if this bar is the same height as this bar, but it's farther away in the distance, that tells us it must be a very tall bar. Okay? Same thing over here. This looks like railroad tracks or another sidewalk. The would-be parallel lines on the sides look like they converge together at the vanishing point, telling your brain that this bar is farther away from you than this bar is. Therefore, since they look like the same length, but this one is so far away, it must be much longer. But no, they're exactly the same length. On your retina, they're the same length of bar, but your brain interprets this one as being longer because of the relative depth cues here, linear perspective. Same thing with the monsters here. This monster looks much larger than this one. Again, pause the video, measure these suckers out if you don't believe me. Those monsters are the exact same height. But look at all these would-be parallel lines. If we were in a tunnel with these bricks all over the place, they would be actual parallel lines. The fact that they look like they converge, this linear perspective of the lines tells our brain this guy's farther away. And if he appears to be that large, that far away, he must be huge. And this guy's in the foreground, according to the linear perspective. So he must be quite small. Okay? Linear perspective. You need one eye to see these lines appearing to converge, and it tells your brain to perceive depth. Let's talk about a couple of other things before leaving these slides, because linear perspective isn't the only thing going on here. Here's a confusing one to talk about. How about relative height? Relative height is another monocular depth cue. That means you only need one eye to see it. When you look at something in reality, whenever it's farther away from you, this is tough to explain. It's tough to notice. You've noticed this, this has affected you your whole life, and you've never had to think about it consciously. When you look at something far away, it appears to be higher to you than the things that are very close to you. That's called relative height. Next time you're outside, if you're at a flat field or something, so imagine standing at a football field. You know that football field is flat. And if you're standing behind one goalpost, looking at the other one that's about 100 yards away, the goalpost right in front of you will look like it's right in front of, like it's right there. But if you point to the goalpost that's 100 yards away, you're going to be pointing up here. Oh, it's right there. It's not down here. It appears on your retina like it's higher in your visual field. The relative height of that goalpost that's far away, the fact that it looks like it's higher in your visual field, tells your brain it's farther away. Here's another way of explaining that. Imagine you were drawing any one of these pictures. Look, imagine this is a picture, like on a piece of paper, drawn in front of you, and you're going to reproduce it on another sheet of paper. Notice you're drawing this monster lower on the paper, and this monster is higher on the paper. This monster is like in the middle of the paper, and this guy's at the bottom of the paper. Same thing with the other drawings on the screen here. The fact that this guy, this monster, is higher on the paper, along with the linear perspective, all these cues work together telling your brain, oh yeah, this guy's in the distance, and he's huge. This guy is tiny and he's closer to me. No, he's not. It's an illusion playing off your depth cues. Imagine your brain processing all this stuff at the same time, making sense constantly without you having to think about it, telling you whether something's near or far. All right, one other thing to discuss here. I like this monster illusion because there's also a thing called the context effect. Now, this isn't about depth perception, but just another example of top-down processing. While we have the example here very quickly, do these two monsters look exactly the same to you in the face? Or does one of them look emotionally different than the other? Does one of them look angry or mean? Does one of them look scared? Because those are two very different emotions. Angry versus scared. Folks, these are the exact same faces, the exact same monsters. Excuse me. But because we have the context of this guy chasing this other guy, That context will tell our minds, tell our brains, so this guy must be angry and this guy must be scared to death, even though they have the exact same facial expression. The context of the situation makes us experience their faces maybe very differently. Okay, these are all examples of top-down processing. We're interpreting the world around us. Now, let's talk quickly about some other depth cues. Here's something called retinal disparity. And before I talk about what this is exactly, let's understand that retinal disparity is a binocular depth cue. That means for what I'm about to explain to you, you need both eyes for this to happen. Binocular depth cue, retinal disparity. So what this means is retinal has to do with the retinas in the back of your eyeballs. And disparity is a word that means difference. So literally, this is a depth cue that comes from the difference in location of your two retinas. Because your eyeballs are separated by an inch or so, right? Because of the bridge of your nose, it separates your two eyeballs. That means that your two retinas are getting a slightly different perspective on the world, one from another. Meaning, if I hold my hand out in front of me like this, right in front of me, this retina is getting a slighter different vantage point on my hand than this retina is, because this retina is coming, from the left point of view, and this one from the right. So generally speaking, they're getting two slightly different versions of the image they're looking at. Well, that difference that might exist tells the brain something about distance. Think of it like this. When you move your hand right in front of your face, the retinal disparity is great. There's a lot of difference because your hand's right in front of your face. This eye is getting a very different point of view on your hand than your other eye is. You can test it out. Try it. Do this with your hand right in front of your face. Close one eye. I don't know if you can see through the reflection of my glasses. Close one eye and look at that hand right in front of your face. And then close the other eye while you open that first one. So you're winking back and forth. Keep the hand still, but change your wink. Camera one, camera two, camera one, camera two, camera one, camera two. You can isolate the image on each retina. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to guess you're experiencing the same thing as me right now. It looks like when I go from one eye to the other, to the other, to the other, back and forth, it looks like my hand is jumping back and forth. It's not. I know I'm holding my hand still. But what you're doing there is isolating your retinal disparity. Now, try the same thing with your arm fully extended. Look at your hand and do the wink exchange again. That's a weird phrase, wink exchange. Sounds like you're harassing someone. Don't do that either. But anyway, with arm extended, do it now. Camera one, camera two, camera one, camera two. My hand is not jumping as drastically in my visual field as it was when my hand was very close to my face. That's because, folks, you ready for this? The retinal disparity, the different point of view of your two retinas, is greater when things are very close to you. You hold a pen close to your face. There's a pen there. Sorry, the visual effects are messed up here. I apologize for that. I hold a pen close to my face. The fact that the retinal disparity is very great, the difference in vantage point is very great when the pen is close to me, that tells my brain, by the time that image gets to the occipital lobe, my brain will interpret, oh, that pen's very close to us. How do we know? Well, I mean, interposition and the other things we've learned about, but also retinal disparity. Because the pen is very close to my face, the difference in vantage point is great. And that tells my brain the pen is close. When the pen is farther away, the retinal disparity is less. Okay, the farther away that pen is, the more I have the same vantage point from each eye. And therefore, because the retinal disparity is lesser, that helps tell the brain, oh, now the pen is farther away. but I need both eyes to do that. The floating finger sausage is something you can try. It's an illusion. You can follow the directions there and see if you can get your two fingertips in front of your nose at just the right point. You can move them back and forth. Up there it is. And you can get it at just the right point where you isolate the retinal disparity, and it will look like there's a floating finger sausage right in front of your face because you're seeing the perspective from one eye, one retina, seeing your left hand and right fingertip, and the right eye, seeing the right hand and left fingertip. And it'll look like these two fingertips are joined together if you do it just right because of retinal disparity. Now, there's one more binocular depth cue that I need you to understand, meaning we need two eyes for this one to work. Besides retinal disparity, it's called convergence. Convergence, you need two eyes for. Sorry, hun, if you're listening. Don't take offense to it. Anyway, convergence is this. Okay, my hand is outstretched. I'm looking at my hand at the end of my arm, which it's always at the end of my arm. Anyway, my arm is extended straight. I'm looking at my hand. And if I bring my hand in closer to my face, if I move my hand in and I continue staring at that hand, what's happening is my two eyeballs are being turned inward a little bit by my ocular muscles. My eyeballs are turned in as I follow my hand moving toward my face. That's called convergence, when the two eyes are brought inward. Whenever you look at anything that's close to you, your eyes turn inward a little bit to look at that thing that you're looking at. That's convergence. Folks, your brain picks up on your eye muscles turning your eyes inward a little bit. And it's another thing that tells the brain, oh, so this thing is closer. How do I know? Well, because of retinal disparity and because of interposition and linear perspective and relative height. I mean, that's a thing too. But also, the brain goes, the eyes are also turned inward a little bit. That tells me that this thing is closer to me. Well, let me look at that car off in the distance. Okay, the eyes move outward a little bit. And along with all these other cues, that tells the brain, oh, my eyes moved outward. That means that car is farther away. The brain is processing all these different cues simultaneously, helping you perceive depth. Okay, we're back to the monocular depth cues. You got relative size. Generally speaking, folks, when something is farther away from you, it looks smaller. And as it comes closer to you, it appears larger. You never really have to think about it, but that's part of what these illusions are making sense of. Like, which of these circles in the middle is larger? They're both the same. They're both the same size in the middle. But the size of the circles around them, the relative size of the circles, that plays with our perception, and we interpret difference there, even though there's not. These people, we know that this person's way far off in the distance because they're smaller. This guy is closer to us. This room has been made to look like it's parallel, but really this illusion uses all kinds of things, including linear perspective. It's made to look like these lines at the ceiling and the floor are parallel to each other. They're not. This room has been manipulated to make that illusion happen. All right, and the last bit of depth perception we need to talk about, everyone, is aerial perspective. I realize what this looks like now. I didn't notice it before, but this word is aerial, A-R-I-A-L. It doesn't look like it says aerial, but it does. That's aerial, not anything else it might look like it says. Sorry for that. Aerial perspective and texture gradient. Two more monocular depth cues that our brains pick up on for depth perception. This picture here looks like it's raining men, right? Cool song. But look at what's really happening here. Aerial perspective is the principle, it's the reality that, look, when something is far away from us, it's blurry. We don't see a lot of details in it when it's far away. When it's closer to us, we can see more details more clearly. That's called aerial perspective. So for instance, look, this man here, we can see that he's apparently Caucasian. He's got lighter skin. He's even got like a white collar we can see. We can see the shape of his hat. But look at this figure back in the background. Apparently, he's in the background. He's farther away. He's only a silhouette to us. We don't see the white collar. We don't see his skin tone. We don't see the shape of his hat so clearly. That's aerial perspective. Okay? We can see this guy's wearing a necktie. We can't see that in these silhouettes in the background. So our aerial perspective tells our brain, these blurry, more simplified silhouettes, they're farther away. These guys are in the foreground, closer to us. It's a monocular depth cue. Texture gradient, same thing. It's a very similar idea. Anything that's close up to us will look kind of rough, okay, in texture. And when things are far away from us, they appear smooth. Next time you can look outside, if you can do it right now, if it's daylight, look outside at trees at a distance. If they're trees at a distance, they're going to look smooth, almost like popsicles from a distance, right? Like brown tree trunks, and like maybe if you can see leaves, there'll be smooth looking leaves. But look at a tree up close if you can. The bark looks rough in texture. The leaves are jagged maybe. They look rough in texture. That's called texture gradient. It's another thing that tells our brain whether a tree in this case is farther away or up close. If it's farther away, it's going to look smooth. Okay? Not rough. Smooth. That's texture gradient. And it's blurry. I don't see a whole lot of details on trees far away. That's aerial perspective. All right? Those things change when we're looking at things close up. All these things coordinate together in our brains as our brain actively interprets depth for us with all these things that until now we've never had to think of consciously. All right, folks, a lot of top-down processing there, especially with depth perception. We'll end this section. Thank you very much.